Afternoon, this happy Sabbath day or Sunday, depending on your perspective. Broadcasting not live yet still, thanks to the Hallie Everts compliments. Still waiting for that to blow over. In the meantime, today we're actually going to be talking about Letter to an Apostle. So let's go ahead and adjust the screen here. We are now entering outer darkness. Okay. So, a letter to an apostle. It's 36 interrogatories on Joseph Smith and the Mormon narrative by Paul Douglas. So, we're going to actually get into it here today. If you want to read about Mr. Paul Douglas, you can do that on your own time. I suppose this is your own time. Thank you for the compliment of actually sharing my time with yours right now. I'm going to go to the table of contents first of all at this point. And here are the items that Paul gets into here. Anyway, he's got his little intro and his little bio thing. And so he looks like a pretty educated guy. He's got a doctorate and a few other degrees and things like that. They're not in religion, but I think more like management, business management, that kind of a thing. Basically, a guy who ought to be able to think his way out of the church if he's not too mind controlled. So he looks like he's on his way. At least that's the way I see it. Because he's noticed they haven't been telling us the truth in gospel doctrine, even though he apparently used to teach it. Maybe he still does. I kind of doubt that at this point. So, he's got the introduction, and I've mentioned briefly a little bit out of the archaeology and anachronisms business there, but so I'm going to get into a little bit of those and probably go see how many. I'm not going to go too long in these. I'm going to try to keep them kind of bite-sized, and then we're just going to go through them. I've personally read through number 7 on these. So, what do we have? First, introduction. Next, archaeology, anthropology, and linguistics. So we'll get into that. Anachronisms in the Book of Mormon, probably mostly. Of course, there are heavy anachronisms in the Book of Abraham. DNA. No death before the fall of Adam. So the thing I like is that he gets into he uses useful details in these. Instead of saying to yourself, oh, I heard of that, so that's nothing new. Oh, that's old. That's exactly what Fair Mormon likes to put into our minds by, as I mentioned probably yesterday, they just, give us some kind of a retort which just generally doesn't prove much of anything except their dishonesty, and then say, see, that's old news. So we're going to look at the details on these, but let's just go through them real quick. So no death before the fall of Adam. That's a big deal. Basically what we're saying here is we shouldn't find any evidence of any death in this world prior to 6,000 years ago. So we'll see what he has to say about that. I have problems with no life on this earth, no reproduction before 6,000 years ago, and we've got, all sorts of evidence of that. Especially when we have civilizations like, like Göbekli Tepe and things like that. Plagiarism from the Bible. Yeah, lots of it. So he gets into some interesting details on that too. Joseph Smith's criminal behavior. So a lot of that we just, you hear people, or you might see YouTube people, especially Christians, that are saying Joseph Smith was a con man and a this, that, and the other. But they don't usually give a lot of detail. And so he's got some detail here. Looks like he's read No Man Knows My History, which was, of course, maligned by Hugh Nibley when he wrote No Ma'am, That's Not History. But Hugh was the master apologist from which our spawn of Dan Peterson and the like arise. He was a little more knowledgeable than these guys were, probably. At least he had more papers next to his name and so forth at BYU. And He still did the same thing. Just try to say something like, oh, she's probably a lesbian. Don't listen to her. She didn't verify one thing the way I would like her to have out of, like 100 things. So just forget everything she said, right? Yeah, Jeremy Rennell had a parking ticket, so forget about him. He was probably being deceptive. He tried to deceive, Actually, he didn't even have a parking ticket that I'm aware of, but you know how they try to say things. He's a... What? He's a deaf retard! No, I'm not making that up. That's actually on Jeremy's list there of things he's being accused of. I don't think Fair Mormon said he was a deaf retard. That's got to be someone else. They try to look squeaky clean as long as you don't, fact check them and find out that they're actually saying things that they know are not true. All right, Joseph Smith's false prophecies, changes to the Book of Commandments. That's a big one. Yeah. Backdating the priesthood revelation. 5 years. I imagine we'll find things like that in there. The differing first vision accounts. I've got good videos on that, don't I? I think they're pretty good because I got documentation in them. Smith's changing view of the Godhead. Yeah, that's a big point for... I mean, that's something I've talked about that's pretty interesting, and it's nice to have these details. Smith's changing view of the Godhead. The dearth of Jewish customs in the Book of Mormon. Yep, exactly. In my 33 things, 30 you got to put on the shelf, which was redone and called Awesome Anti-Mormons, talking about the fictional origins of the Book of Mormon. We've got stuff about that. Got Sean McCraney talking about some of those things and sharing some specifics that should have been in the Book of Mormon had they actually kept the law of Moses, like they said. But he catches them in some, or maybe somebody else caught him, and Sean reiterated it. But he's a good reiterator, I think, anyway. Don't crucify him just because he's Christian. I kind of like Sean. The method of translation. The LDS Church's misleading images. Oh, yeah. Love those pictures of Joseph Smith checking out the golden plates and Oliver Cowdery writing things down as he's the junior Egyptologist instead of the way his wife said he did it and the way that David Whitmer said he did it, which was looking into the hat at a rock. So, why do we have pictures of Joseph examining golden plates when that doesn't appear to be what even the church says he did now? Even in the essays or, on LDS.org, they've got they've got a picture of his magic rock and said he used it. The method of translation, the LDS Church's misleading images. Fanny Alger. That's like PG-17. Joseph Smith's marriages to very young girls. Joseph's use of sexual coercion. Probably has something to do with promises of eternal life and angels with flaming swords telling little girls they needed to listen to the prophet. Follow the prophet. Follow the prophet. Follow the prophet all the way into the bedroom. Smith's polygamy and polyandry. I guess he doesn't really know. We'll see if he knows much about the spiritual wife system, because he should have mentioned it if he did, because this is playing into the church's apologists' narrative, or their framing of issues into these diversionary issues, like polygamy and polyandry, when the spiritual wife system eclipsed the other issues as far as Joseph Smith's abuse of women. Smith's sexual harassment and abuse of Joseph Smith's narcissism. Did he forget to put women in there? Restoration of the priesthood. Yeah. 5 years too late and changed the Book of Commandments. Joe and Emma and Bill and Jane. Uh-oh. This sounds like... This sounds like, yeah. Emma wants William Law, and Joe wants Jane Law. Let's be swingers. No, I'm not making this stuff up, people. We've got all kinds of material that I'm sure he's going to be showing in here, cataloged for us, which I have previously read much of, just not on his letter. Smith's destruction of the expositor. Newspaper William Law put out on Joseph Smith's spiritual wife system activities and hitting on his wife, and Section 132, which Joseph Smith said never existed. Yeah, that's right. In case you aren't aware of it, Joseph Smith lied about that always. He said that there's no such thing as Section 132. I'm a one-woman man. I don't know what you're talking about. Similarities of Book of Mormon with other books. Doctrinal changes and political pressure. Okay, I'm going to have some disagreements there, I'm pretty sure. Because I think the Sao Paulo Temple had a whole lot to do with the revelation that came like 4 months before on the priesthood, since the temple wouldn't have functioned without that. But he'll probably blame it on Jimmy Carter. And maybe Stanford not playing football with BYU or something. Who knows? Plagiarizing the Sermon on the Mount in 3rd Nephi. Smith's mistranslation of the Book of Abraham. The Kinderhook plates. Copying the Masonic rituals. We'll see what he's got to say. I've probably said a little more than he has on that, but we'll see. Book of Mormon's fullness of the gospel. Yeah, that's right. Section 20 of the Doctrine and Covenants. It's supposedly Jesus himself telling us that the Book of Mormon contains the fullness of the gospel. It just doesn't have much Mormonism in it, that's all. So he'll probably document a few things there. Many changes to the Book of Mormon. Yeah, many. Many changes to the Book of Mormon. The problem with the witnesses. The problem of Oliver Cowdery forging everybody's name. Ooh. You ever notice how the signatures all look like they're in the same handwriting? For the 8 witnesses, I think. Smith's creation of the witness affidavit. Yeah. You know, third-party testimonials should be third-party, not everybody just, having one dude sign something that was the same for all of them. It's better to say, I lost 50 pounds with Nutrisystems, and you can too. Tell your own story. Had to bring Marie Osmond into it, didn't I? Smith's creation of the witness affidavit. Why words used prior to the existence? Like maybe Jehovah? Jesus born in Jerusalem. Huh? Sean McCraney likes to talk about that. The Council of 50 and Smith's treason. Treason? Yeah, well, maybe he'll talk about Joseph Jackson. He knows a lot about that. Colluding with the Russians. I'm not kidding. Trying to. That's what, according to Joseph Jackson, and the trying to create, like one of those first metal submarines like they tried to do in the Civil War and stuff or whatever. The big boats, the Merc and the Merrimack or whatever. The Book of Mormon's astounding population growth. Yeah, it is pretty astounding. Smith was no martyr. Oh, come on. Yeah, he wasn't a martyr, but let's not knock him for shooting a few people when they, it was like 150 to 4 guys, okay, and only like 2 guns, so it wasn't fair. I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon there, but calling him a martyr, yeah, sorry, Jeffrey Holland, I'm not gonna call Joseph Smith a martyr there either. It was a gunfight. It was an unfair gunfight. It was, 150 to 3. That's 50 to 1, basically. Well, they had 4 dudes, but like I said, a cane isn't really much against a revolver. So 2 guns, a few shots, 150 dudes or so. It wasn't fair. Contemporary issues. All right. So, anyway, done that, and I wanted to also take a look at the links, just so, what the heck, we're still getting to the beginning of this thing. This is like a book, basically, now. I'm not sure if we have the full content here, but who's he recommending? Obviously, my main complaint here is that, Mormon Truth Videos is not in here at this point yet, either on that channel or the Dodger Game channel. So, Paul Douglas, I'm going to have to tell you, pal, this list is at least one short, in my never humble opinion. So, let's see what he's got here. Number 1, Mormon Think website. Yeah, lots of good information on there, and as we know, or as some of you know, they try to be pretty fair about it. They're more fair than Fair Mormon, because they tend to have links to Fair Mormon, which is the most ridiculous site I've ever seen in my life. And if any, they always say, hey, we got a response from the church, but the church doesn't respond to issues. They have someone else do it. That way they've got plausible deniability. Hey, we didn't say that. That was BYU. Yeah. That was Fair Mormon. Psst, hey, can I talk to Dan Peterson? Or Brian Hales? We've got a new letter here. We need somebody to write some trash about it. We can't put it in our name on the essays. Okay, so, yeah, Mormon Think's probably the premier website as far as having all kinds of issues covered. I actually liked it better earlier. Last time I looked at it, they don't have the people's anti-testimonies, the stories hardly. At least I couldn't seem to find only more than just a handful. I used to read some good, stories where people were waking up to the mind control and to the contradictions in the scriptures and to the whitewashed history and their experiences, and I liked that. And now you can see that like on Ex-Mormon, some of them, but a lot of the ones I found really stuff I thought was high quality here. And on Ex-Mormon, I don't know, maybe you like that perspective. I mean, I guess it just gives you more of I think that's where it was, Ex-Mormon or more Recovery from Mormonism. You can read some of those, and some of them are the kind that are talking about how they discovered things, and some of them are people that just said, I just wanted to get loaded. It's like the church said. So maybe half the people quit for that. I don't know. All right, so next, Investigating Mormonism by Richard Packham. All right, he says, Richard Packham is a brilliant writer and thinker and provides a corpus of valuable material for those wanting to investigate the Mormon religion from an intellectual perspective. Yeah, I've used some of Packham's stuff sometimes, like in that honesty one where he lines up some facts, and that's a good thing. It says, okay, here's what Hiram Smith said. He said, we've heard people are talking about polygamy. For God's sakes, Joseph and I have never done anything like that. I'll tell you that. Anyone doing that's an evildoer, and it's an abomination. Things like that. Or Joseph Smith saying, they say I've got 7 wives, but I can find but one. William Law says I'm an adulterer, but I'm as innocent as I was 14 years ago. Except with the 14-year-olds. Something like that. So, Packham's got some nice facts on there. Like I said, Mormon Think, I liked it better earlier. I think maybe Grant Palmer got a hold of it or something before he died, and maybe he's trying to Christianize it or something. I don't know. I just liked it better before, but it's got a lot of stuff. Like I said, they if someone's got an apologetic answer, they try to represent both sides. They're more fair and balanced than you'll get on Fox News, that's for sure. Okay, next. So I think Mormon Thinks, if you're looking for a fact about something, trying to look it up, Mormon Thinks pretty darn good. Mormon Stories, John DeLynn, he says, is a straight shooter and has interviewed almost everybody. He hasn't interviewed me. With an important story to tell about the Mormon experience. Maybe I'm not important. Of course, I haven't called John or anything. Mormon Stories does not have an axe to grind and the conversations are well worth watching. I've watched a number of them and met some cool people out of it too. Yeah, I think John's done a really important work there in allowing people to share their stories and their perspectives. I don't agree with everything that I think that John necessarily believes, which is fine. I don't think you'll find a nicer guy than John probably anywhere. He tries to be fair. I think he's too fair to the representatives of the church, basically, saying things sometimes that I don't like. Like, isn't there a lot of good in Mormonism? No, they're good people, is my opinion. I don't think that supporting an evil organization that's based on fraud from the very beginning and has exploited people, I don't see that that's good. I don't believe in the church changing. I don't think it's okay. It's based on evil. It needs to be destroyed. That's my view. So don't accuse Jeremy Reynolds of it if he doesn't want to be. You can accuse me of it. I'll say it straight up. An evil tree does not produce good fruit. There are good people in Mormonism, despite Mormonism. Good people in it. But no, the foundation is as wicked as the abominable church of the devil has been described in the Book of Mormon, if you ask me. So, there you go. Utah Lighthouse Ministry. Okay, so that's Sandra Tanner, and used to be her hubby, Gerald, with her. All right, and what does he say? They dared to examine one of the richest and most powerful religious organizations in the world. Joseph Smith would be proud to hear that. At a time and in a place in the 60s in Salt Lake City, Utah, when to do so was not only ill-advised but dangerous. Great information. Yeah, you know what? Let's give Sandra Tanner and Gerald Tanner credit on that. They got out of the LDS portion of the religious delusion, and they're Christian. Well, he's a dead Christian, but she's a Christian. They seem like really honest people in the things I've read. They're just because they're Christian, don't count them with Ed Decker. I think they've tried to be honest in things they've presented, very well researched, and he's right. That takes guts. They didn't do it from whatever. They did this right there in Salt Lake, where you's gonna be hated. So at least they probably couldn't have done it as easily if they didn't turn Christian, because there are other, they had some kind of community there that would back them on that. The anti-Mormons, and at any rate, some of the whole anti-Mormons, Christians have done a lot to tarnish the image of those who've come out of the church, because they published some lies, misrepresented some things, but they correctly represented some things, or at least they had some of their facts straight, and so there are guys that went up against them and discovered, well, even if they got half of it right, how many times does Jesus have to lie? So you see guys like Derek Evenson, who decided to be a church apologist, or even wrote a book defending the church, but he discovered in the meantime that the Christians actually had some of it right, and his leaders weren't as honest as he thought. Lee Baker, another guy turned into a Christian. Yeah, I don't know. Some of these guys, they do part of their research, and then they just don't figure out that, sorry, Jesus is an allegory for Titus Flavius. Lee and his wife were committed and caring. Lee was a bishop in the church. And anyway, they have valuable insights. So, let's see. RichKelsey.org. I have never heard of Rich Kelsey, so maybe I better check him out. Rich is a very bright guy, and not at all mean-spirited. His articles are wonderful, a wonderful read, and his research on LDS Church both thorough and impressive. So there you go. So he's got some good things here, and Mormon Think does this kind of thing too. They've got a lot of links out of there too, which is good. I should hit him up again and say, hey, check out these videos. All right, Dan Vogel. He's probably, in my opinion, if you're looking for just straight research, he's probably the best go-to. Because, if you want to look at church, early Mormonism, you got him and Michael Quinn. And Michael Quinn has dug up a lot of stuff, done a really great job. He seems to have he sort of gets a little apologetic sometimes. I think he's upset about his life or something. I don't want to put words in his mouth. It's just, sometimes he says some things that are kind of weird, like he tries to apologize for the church and maybe deep down thinks it's somehow true, even though he's proven that they've lied about everything. But Vogel doesn't have that problem. Like many others, he appears to be completely atheist at this point. He's extremely scholarly, straight shooting. He wants straight information. Yeah. What does he say? What's this guy say about him? No nonsense and absolutely reliable information. I'll second that. All right, next. So Dan does some Vogel. Dan does books, and Dan also does some videos. They're usually like about 45 minutes to an hour, and they're good. Dan does do good work, really good work. Mormon Research Ministry, Bill McKeever. I've watched a couple of his things. He's a Christian zealot, I guess, in my opinion. Sorry, Bill, if that is, I think mischaracterizing you, but it probably isn't. He's one of those guys that hangs out at, some of the Manti pageant or something and tells Mormons, hey, did you know Joseph Smith had lots of women in his life and so forth? Or that, hey, see if you can run around with 200-pound lead plates, because gold would have been 203, or whatever. Bill's a pretty sharp guy. I'm not into his Christianity scene, but yeah, probably got some interesting. If you don't mind the Christian slant, he's all about Jesus, I'm sure. Really about Jesus. So, I think he hasn't done his ancient history research very well necessarily, or he's biased or whatever, but he's good at calling out Mormonism. MormonInfo.org. I find the site operated by Rob Savulka to be very worthwhile, says Paul, particularly as it compares Mormonism to Christianity. Okay, great. And Grant Palmer, it says, okay, Grant's, no longer in the physical world. He has left us 3 important books. Anyway, yeah, Grant Palmer's got some stuff that's interesting. Was he in the CES? I get him confused sometimes with Richard Packham, some of the, their bios and so forth. But both of them have done a lot of stuff they've researched well, and generally I've found their facts to be, straight. They're not, like I said, they're not pulling Ed Deckers on you and saying, Mormons believe Joseph Smith atoned for your sins by dying at Carthage in his wonderful martyrdom. Okay, let's just breeze into the first chapter before I get this too long here, and see if we go any farther than that. Let me hit a pause. Okay, so this is chapter 1 here. In the letter to an apostle, why, or number 1 anyway here, of his 36 points or so. Why is there a total absence of any archaeological or anthropological evidence of the civilizations, cultures, and large populations spoken of in the Book of Mormon? Okay, if this is not new to you, The value here probably is that he does a nice job throwing in some information, some documentation that I think is pretty useful. So let's see what he's got. This was a big deal to him. And if we really think about it, sometimes we just get mentally conditioned. Oh, we got to take things on faith. But let's remember, there are much smaller civilizations for much shorter periods of time when there were like incursions of other civilizations, like we've seen, Roman, occupation of the British Isles or various other ones that have got all kinds of evidence of their existence. And he talks about the Bible, Christians always love to say, oh, the Bible's got evidence. Well, it's not evidence necessarily that the stories that happened there are true, but for goodness sakes, at least we know that Jerusalem really does exist, and Bethlehem and the Sea of Galilee, and, some of these things that are written in there actually exist. Where's Zarahemla? Where's Bountiful? Where's Desolation? Where is anything that's in the Book of Mormon? They've got millions of people being killed in these battles, or these wars, and then you got 620,000 men died in the entire Civil War, and you've got, loads of evidence. Sure, it's more recent. Well, like I said, you can. So he gives some examples of other civilizations where we've got evidence that they've got absolutely zero, zilch, zip, nada on the Book of Mormon. And they talk about some guy, a professor for BYU. He's employed for like 17 years for supposedly mainly or maybe solely to come up with archaeological evidence supporting the Book of Mormon, and he came up with nothing. And his statement was basically at the end, and he puts it in here saying, sorry, the dirt isn't going to ever match the book because it's basically all made up. So he gives some here he's got examples. The existence of the Hittites. Okay, so in Genesis it talks about some Hittites. So he gives, these people at least existed. We may not have, the stories may be made up. Sometimes they're anachronistic, they'll talk about a city that didn't exist yet. But at least at some point it existed, for goodness sakes. I mean, some of these things are still there. And language, people still speak Hebrew. Yeah, they still speak these languages. Egyptians still speak Egyptian. Maybe it's changed some. But the American Indians don't speak Hebrew or Egyptian. And their languages aren't based on them. Why? Okay. The burial place of King Uzziah. All right. The Moabite stone. So, you read through these, and you're going to have, he's got, all of these, he's got a bunch of biblical cities that actually have some archaeology there that, they existed, they says. Jericho, really? Haran, Hazor, Dan, Medigo, Shechem, Samaria, Shiloh, and a bunch of them. Have been excavated, and they have artifacts. They have coins. Yeah, you look at the coins, look at the Roman coins. Yeah, that's right. The Roman coins have all the symbols that were used for Christianity at the time when they invented it. But they have something. As the following references will attest, leading unbiased, that is, non-LDS, archaeologists and anthropologists maintain that the Book of Mormon is purely a work of 19th century fiction and nothing more. Certainly not an actual history of real people. So they They argue that millions of chariot-driving, Christ-worshipping, steel-smelting, horse-riding, wheel-using Hebrews occupying the Americas for more than 2,000 years could not possibly have just happened without leaving some trace of their being. So, yeah, he even gets in here and shows where, like, Joseph Fielding Smith says, God hid the evidence so that we'd have to have faith. He just didn't do that with anything else. Right? So, there's interesting material in here. And then he's got, the rumor mill. You hear these whispers like, the Smithsonian Institute's really using the Book of Mormon as their secret guide to find interesting things in the Americas. Somebody writes them a letter or they find out about it and they go, no, are you kidding us? We've never done that. The thing's ridiculously unrelated to anything in the real world. Sorry. So, so you got statements like that from, Smithsonian Institute or National Geographic or, these kind of things going, no, sorry, people. Book of Mormon, nobody like that ever lived in the Americas. We've got all kinds of evidence of it being completely different from that. And then we got B.H. Roberts, church historian in 70, who basically said, Joseph Smith probably could have made this stuff up. Yeah. By the time I got done looking around at this and noticed all the stuff that's, really suspicious in the Book of Mormon that shouldn't be there, and stuff that should be here isn't. Where are the horses? Where are the chariots? I mean, yeah, it says King Lamoni got in his... Ammon was preparing his horses and his chariots. And we're supposed to believe that was his tapir and his sled. I mean... yeah. Anyway. So, lots of things that he just documents here. And then he talks about Fair Mormon. He said, Fair Mormon goes, we've got continuing discoveries. How can you continue to have discoveries when you've never had one ever? And they say we've got all kinds of evidence. I mean, this is printed on Fair Mormon. Said we've got evidence of Book of Mormon archaeology. So where is it? Well, we can't say what it is. We can't do anything specific, but it's here. There's plenty of it. He's like, okay, let's read the rest of the article. Oh, there's nothing there. All right, so they find 3 letters, N-H-M. We've talked about that before. So that's got to mean Nahom. So that means that Lehi names an altar, in the Arabian Peninsula by putting N-H-M. So that must mean Nahom, because Nahom, is mentioned in the Book of Mormon. But in 2,600 years, we can't find anything like that in the Americas. With their millions of people that lived in the Americas, there's nothing. But like about 20 people, max, something like that, whatever, at that point, in the Arabian Peninsula. I mean, they might have got up to like 40 at some point. Somebody writes 3 letters in Hebrew on an altar, and that means it was Lehi coming to America. But once he gets here, he banned it. There are millions of people. They don't have the artifacts here. No. Sure, I'm buying it. Give me another drink. It'll make it even more believable. Just kidding. Didn't have a drink. All right. So, Fair Mormon responded to his stuff a little bit, and you can read it if you want to. Basically, anytime I read Fair Mormon, it's like almost nauseating. All they do is just spin webs, and they can never address facts. They just try to imply or say somebody's dishonest or they're deceptive or whatever, and then they just make this garbage up. I mean, how do they do this? How do you say things like they say? How do you say... How do you say continuing discoveries confirm the Book of Mormon with archaeology, and then you can't come up with one example? All right. What does he got here? The stagnation. Here's some things that, so Fair Mormon attacks him, but this is what they like to do. They like to just find one point and then, try to make you look bad. Apparently, it says, I note as well that I raised a number of significant issues in my letter that Fair Mormon has chosen, for reasons best known to themselves, not to address in any way, including the stagnation in the church's growth, the increasing bureaucracy or bureaucratization within the church, the leadership of the church's lack of discernment. The leadership of the church's lack of discernment. Did he say that right? Anyway, the obvious evidence of lack of discernment, aka money things like, Mark Hoffman's documents being completely phony, but seers of God buying them for $900,000 combined, I think. The church's ambience on the becoming God's business. Oh, we don't talk about that too much anymore. In fact, Gordon B. Hinckley said things like, I don't know that we teach that, except in the priesthood manual right now. I don't know that we emphasize that. The church's history of racism. Well, they didn't want to talk about that. The church's LGBTQ policies. The role of women in the church. The role of women in the church is to make babies and to do primary. Just ask the Apostle Paul. He said, Eve made the big mistake, therefore all you women just make babies and that'll be your saving grace. It's in 1 Timothy. And by the way, be quiet. Do it quietly. Keep silence in the churches where it's a disgrace for you women to say anything. Chapter 14 of 1 Corinthians kind of gets into that, doesn't it? The church's secrecy when it comes to its finances. All right. So, there we go. So, Fair Mormon proves their dishonesty once again, and apparently they chose their battles very carefully. They don't just go and address those issues that he just mentioned, apparently, he's saying. And B.H. Roberts, once again, here gets into the linguistic aspects and saying there's just no way that they could come up with all these languages. Roberts indicated that the diverse language stocks and dialects would simply not have had enough time to develop from a single language dating from like AD 400. So that was just one of the many things, and he was a general authority and said, sorry, there's just no way these American Indians got this out of Hebrew or Egyptian. Okay? Language development takes a lot longer than that, and like I said, somehow they managed to continue speaking the languages, in the Middle East that they always had, but the people that come to the Americas from there have lost all trace of them, as well as losing all trace of all these big cities and all these artifacts, and it's ridiculous. How can millions of people exist and dominate continents and leave no trace of their heritage, of anything? Forget how to speak their language, forget how to read and write, forget how to make steel, forget how to make chariots, lose all their horses and chariots and pigs and goats and sheep and elephants and bees. Yeah. Anyway, Paul H. Dunn can sell you some swampland in Florida, but he's dead. Otherwise, maybe you ought to reconsider how believable this stuff is. I think I'm going to head for the next chapter in the next video.